I now give the floor to His Excellency John Silk, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Marshall Islands.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, I have the honor to bring the warm greetings of Biaqui on behalf of the people and government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Mr. President, I congratulate you on your election, and I rest assured you will continue the strong efforts of your predecessor. I also want to express my deep condolences to the people of Bahamas and to all the victims of Hurricane Dorian. Please know that as a fellow islanders, the people of the Marshall Islands stand with you. Mr. President, the United Nations must be the platform for the voices of the most vulnerable peoples and the governments of the world. Yet we are all at a time in global politics where countries have been driven to look inwards at the very moment when all need to be doing the opposite. We risked the tragedy of overlooking those most in need. The Marshallese people know this from our own experience. Our history with the United Nations extends to its founding and charter. As a United Nations trusteeship, we approached the United Nations twice, in 1954 and again in 1956, to stop the testing of nuclear weapons on our shores. And twice, the United Nations disregarded our petitions in place of resolutions authorizing nuclear detonations. Twice, our voices were unheard. And twice, larger political concerns overruled the protection of our human rights. As a UN Human Rights Council rapporteur affirmed in 2012, that this is not just a gravely difficult legacy, but a contemporary reality which continues to impact our human rights. I am drawing your direct attention to this chapter of the Marshall Islands to illustrate the global importance of human rights. Because our chapter is far from the only moment at the United Nations where we, as member states, have failed our solemn obligations to our peoples, where we have failed to take meaningful and effective action to address core human rights of those most in need, and where larger politics have so clouded our vision that too often the world has acted too little, too late, or sometimes not at all. We know this from our own perspective in the Pacific, but it is also a common cause embodied in the core human rights treaties and commitments which we all share. In the Marshall Islands, we have built up our own protection of human rights, not just by joining treaties, but by working steadily to turn words into action. Yet we still have much to do to ensure a resilient future. When I entered politics years ago, the Marshall Islands was in its youth as a newly independent nation. We were truly nation building. But now, as an atoll small island developing state, a nation only 1 meter above sea level, with no higher ground, the climate crisis has now forced us to engage in nation saving. This is not academic, it is real, it is now, and it imperils our future, our security, and our core human rights. For these reasons, the Marshall Islands will stand in 2 weeks' time for election to the Human Rights Council. Our experience has taught us to be a bridge builder, a careful listener, but also a nation unafraid to take strong stand when it is needed, even if it's unpopular. I truly hope we will be judged on the strength of our conviction and on the merits of all we have accomplished on our own human rights records and all we have committed to pursue, not to be judged for the size of our GDP or the number of chocolates which we have handed out. As the Marshall Islands, we are representing to the United Nations General Assembly what we do have: ourselves, our stories, our independent voice, and our passionate belief that everyone must be held to account. Mr. President, the Pacific Islands region is a steward of global oceans and sustainable fisheries. My country is more than 99% ocean. So what for some is a distant and obscure policy issue, it is for us our livelihood and our identity. We look forward to concluding negotiations next year on a robust new treaty for biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction under the law of the sea, which provides coherence between sectors. As I reported to the Human Rights Council earlier this year, the members of our Regional Forum Fisheries Agency have also recently issued a declaration to ensure human rights are protected in our fisheries sector, including aboard foreign vessels which dominate our waters. Fisheries in the Pacific is often a proxy for security and influence. As my president told the G7 leaders last year, illegal fishing is not only an economic menace, but also a threat to our sovereignty. We welcome current assistance and urge a more intensified focus from our partners and the international community to combat illegal fishing in our region. Not only does it benefit our regional security, but it also helps to preserve global food security. Mr. President, we welcome partner efforts to help us achieve a free, open, democratic, and secure Indo-Pacific region. Our island nations work hard to achieve independence, and maintaining our stability, sovereignty, and security is a clear priority. Further, we welcome the recent statement by the United States during the recent Pacific Islands Forum. And when I quote, the United States recognized that addressing environmental degradation and climate change is a priority in the Pacific due to the threat posed by sea level rise and the region's vulnerability to natural disasters, close quote. I suggest the significance of this statement is under-recognized, and that this can spur a vital and much-needed dialogue on climate change with our region. Our Pacific Forum stands united in our leaders' adoption of the Boe Declaration as the defining regional security framework. The recent recorded vote this summer in the General Assembly on the resolution cooperation between the United Nations and the Pacific Island Forum was a sad moment for both the Pacific region and the UN. The member states which called for this recorded vote seem to realize no shame in publicly bullying the smallest and most vulnerable nations in the world. The wider implications of this should be of grave concern to any democratic nation. Mr. President, our health is vital. We face communicable diseases such as the ongoing nationwide dengue fever outbreak, which is worsened by climate impacts. And we face non-communicable diseases, including one of the world's highest incidence rates of diabetes. We welcome the partnership with the World Health Organization and other organizations and urge more effort to collaborate on island-tailored strategies. We have the political will at highest levels, but we lack the capacity and resources needed to protect our population. In this regard, we welcome the ongoing collaboration with UNICEF and the World Bank to help us study, understand, and address childhood stunting and root causes which have hindered the physical growth, education, and well-being of generations of Marshallese children. Improving childhood development in the first 1,000 days of life will have a dramatic and lasting impact on our future generations. Mr. President, the Pacific Islands region has made positive strides, but has still substantial work ahead to more effectively address gender equality. This is not just a matter of policy tools and capacity, but also political will. Even with recent legal and legislative improvements in my nation, rates of domestic violence remain unacceptably high. Our island region has the lowest rate of women in parliament in the world. And as a nation with the first woman leader in the independent Pacific, it is important that UN Women continue to strengthen its focus in our region and collaborate to address root causes of gender inequality, working within our cultural context. Mr. President, there was once a time when small island nations were not recognized within the UN. As yesterday's Samoa Pathway Review meeting makes clear, island nations are now well recognized as global leaders and innovators within our own right. Yet we all still have much to do in turning words into action. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are a groundbreaking achievement in their use of indicators to benchmark progress towards clear targets. However, our challenge is that our small island government is simply overwhelmed by the sheer scale of nearly 250 SDG statistical indicators at hand. Clearly, this structure wasn't designed to fit the structure and capacity of small island nations, and the global participation as a result is a one-size-fits-all structure. So in the Marshall Islands, we have realized that SDGs are a springboard and tool to get to island-tailored strategies. We want the UN to work for us, not the other way around. More targeted assistance by the UN system, including in statistical capacity in line ministries, is urgent. Mr. President, we join our region in thanking the Secretary General for his initiative in undertaking meaningful and effective UN system reform and his drive to succeed where others have fallen short. In particular, we emphasize the importance of the Secretary General's advocacy in proposing to establish a new UN multi-country office in the Northern Pacific. Despite strong efforts, our UN resident coordinator cannot effectively serve 10 diverse and remote nations from a single office. Our northern sub-region is missing out on existing assistance opportunities within the UN system because of these disconnections. Mr. President, we are still facing challenges from the impacts of nuclear weapons testing, and our experience should be a global lesson of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear detonation. We are left with a devastating footprint on our health, well-being, environment, and rights of our population. This is contamination which we did not cause and for which we lack the capacity to fully understand, let alone address. The recent establishment of a nuclear commission and its progress towards a work plan is a historic step forward. But we cannot do it alone and call for assistance by the Secretary General to define a structured work plan by the UN system with a defined focal point within the UN headquarters management team. Accountability within the UN system is needed to help answer the joint call by the Pacific Island Forum leaders for unique and targeted assistance in addressing remediation. Mr. President, the Republic of the Marshall Islands strongly affirms our close relationship with Taiwan. And this lasting friendship between our free and democratic nations is truly unstoppable. Indeed, this month, our Parliament strengthened these ties with an unanimous resolution. Further, Taiwan should play a clear role within the UN system, including meaningful participation in relevant specialized agencies and mechanisms like the UNFCCC, WHA, and ICAO. If we as a world and the United Nations were truly serious that no one is left behind, we should recognize participation and assistance from all relevant sources and thus appropriately recognize Taiwan's partnership and engagement with my own nation and others. Mr. President, for those unfamiliar with the geography of atoll small nations like my own, coral atolls are formed by the sinking of extinct volcanoes, leaving us with thin, low-lying, and narrow islands. This demands a perfect balance with sea levels, one now upset by sea level rise. And warming waters are leading to increased and nearly constant bleaching of coral, which globally is now at risk of survival by mid-century. My nation is literally being eaten away. But we share the sentiment that we are not sinking, we are fighting. We are not helpless victims, but we are pushing forward our policy tools to define the future. But will anyone respond to our dire need for assistance at scale? When I was a young boy in the Marshall Islands, the unavoidable sound of ocean waves crashing upon our coral reefs was to me a natural symphony. But to my grandchildren, the same sound is rapidly becoming to them a threat of inundation. Do they not share my same right to live in their ancestral homes? In response, I can only quote from our national constitution. And I quote, "All we have and are today as a people, we have received as a sacred heritage which we pledged ourselves to safeguard and maintain, valuing nothing more than our rightful home on these islands." Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Marshall Islands.